Creative company is so delicious, and the creative process is one of my favorite subjects. How humans can create something out of nothing is wildly exciting to me. And one of the best ways I love to spend my time is writing and recording my songs. Candy Leonard is a writer, and she's a sociologist. She's fascinated with psychology, as I am, and the behavior of human beings and why we do and think what we do. She's the author of the book Beatleness, a book about the Beatles from the fans' point of view. It's the only one of its kind. I wrote to her after reading one of her articles. She was able to put into words things that were so poignant about the Beatles. I just had to talk to her.
Hi.
Hello.
You're wearing your Ringo birthday shirt.
Happy birthday, Ringo. We love you, right? Peace and love.
We're doing our own version of it, I guess.
It's noon. Beatle Candy, hello. How are you?
I'm pretty good. How are you?
I'm pretty excellent too.
Yeah, it's interesting. I thought it was great that you're doing this, but I was, given our brief distant encounter with this, I was a little surprised, but hey, good for you.
I was totally surprised too, because I was just wanting to have creative company. And I thought, why don't I have a Zoom chat? And then it turned out, why don't I try a few more people? And then someone said, so what are you calling this thing? Thanks for having me on and all this stuff. And I was like, what are you talking about? And it seemed technically difficult because you can't really change MP4s into MP3s very easily. But I realized DaVinci Resolve, where I do a little video editing if we need it, does it. So that made the whole thing very easy. And I just dumped them over there. And before you know it, they threw it on all the podcast sites. And someone said, you should call this something and we should do a podcast. I was like, okay. But what's fascinating is it's fantastic company for me. And it's all the things I'm interested in. So I think I'm the only one that's going to listen to them, but I'm really digging them.
Well, it happened so organically that it has this sort of, it had its own momentum. So you kind of had to go with it, right? It's like,
in a way, because I was thinking of the Julia Child movie where Meryl Streep plays her, and in Stanley Tucci's asking, well, what do you like to do? And she said, well, I like to eat, And right. When Oprah needed a job, they said, well, what do you like to do? She's like, well, I want to get paid to talk.
Right. Well, you see, I never had the nerve to answer that question the way I probably should have the many times I was asked it. So
what would you have answered?
I think that, I'm doing it now, but, I think that I was, I think I'm an artist, but I didn't realize that. And that part of me was not, cultivated. So, so you said like what I like to talk to interesting people. I whatever it might be. It's like, that's the thing you should do. In fact, when I was a kid, my mother tells me that I used to say I wanted to host the Tonight Show.
There you go.
And I did, in fact, have a radio talk, not TV. Well, actually, I did do briefly TV, too, in Somerville Community Access. But
that's cool.
I had a radio show in New Hampshire for 8 years. So
really? Which show was that? It
was a parenting show. And wow. I was diapering my son one day. This must have been 91. And I don't know, I was just thinking about like listening to, I don't know, somehow it just hit me that like radio would be a great medium for parent education and parenting stuff. So I proposed it to the local station, and we said, we can find a sponsor, we'll do it. And we did find a sponsor, Frisbee Memorial Hospital up in Rochester, New Hampshire.
Wow.
We did for 8 years. It was great. It was great fun. But yeah,
amazing.
Communicating, talking to people, good conversation. That's the stuff of life,
Absolutely. And how cool you did it for 7-8 years. That's amazing.
But the flip side of this is you're a person who doesn't like small talk. And so that kind of makes you weird in certain kinds of workplaces and, milieus where you're supposed to just smile and talk about nonsense.
I'm not good at that.
I'm not either. Not only am I not good at it, but I feel I have a principled objection to it. It's like a waste of time, you know. I have had some conventional job situations, and I'm remembering particularly like I worked at this not-for-profit in New Hampshire. It was doing good work, but it was like, you know, we'd leave 6:00. I'd be back the next morning at 9. Like, you just saw me. So like, how was your evening? How are you? It's like, you just saw me. And it just, I understand it's like nice and it creates cohesion and all that. But on the other hand, it was like, why are we doing this? We have to like write grants. Like, let's get to it.
Well, you know, I had seen that movie Pump Up the Volume when it came out, and parts of it were really fun, but the idea just hit me then. It was like, I would like to be a radio DJ. So I did that at WUMB for a little while. So I do have my radio license. Yeah.
It's so much fun. I mean, when I would have I would interview, after a while, it kind of morphed into sort of a general interest talk show. But, you know, I had, nobody would refuse to come. Like, it was mostly like local experts, professors. But sometimes we do call-ins with different, you know, people. And, but it was a great, you know, it's such a buzz, like to interview people and have a great interview that, you know, adds value to the world, like not just two people like bullshitting, you know, but like, although, you know, who's to say? I mean, sometimes two people bullshitting does have enormous value. Like, I mean, it's been award-winning movies based on that. Anyway.
And it's funny sometimes, yeah.
But yeah, and I think that the art of conversation we are losing it in the next generation. I mean, I don't want to sound like an old person, but I am. And yeah, it's because of the phone, but also I think it's also because of just the culture of busyness and the way the demands of modern life, that people just feel really stressed. And to like chat, you know, and again, this may contradict my aversion to small talk, but there is value in connecting with people, you know, to just keep the reservoir full, you know, like just maintain that thing. And I think that, or even to have, you know, sort of meandering conversations, just conjecturing on the world or talking about, you know, just different, like there's no time for that. You know what I mean? There's just no time for it.
Yeah. How did we first, do you remember what year it was and what article it was that I read of yours that I had to write you?
I absolutely do remember.
You do?
You want me to review that?
Yes.
What level of detail do you want? I can tell you exactly. It's also, I mean, I would have been able to do this had I not been recently thinking, you know, being reflective on my past. But yes, it was 1990. I want to say 8 or 9. Oh, if you read the article, so then it was 1999. I had gone to Liverpool and wrote an essay about it in the Boston Globe that was published in the Boston Globe travel section.
Wow.
And as a result of that, and this was before it was easy to find, well, it was early days of the internet, but like people found me and like wrote me letters like, oh, that's so great. You're so lucky. I loved your piece. Or, you know, they would say that they had a similar kind of, you know, experience, or people would say, oh, I'm looking forward, you know, it was just very, and so that's when I realized, like you're not the only person who still likes the Beatles, you know. So,
well, it was very lonely in those days. There weren't that many people that spoke of them very highly or spoke of them enough. They certainly weren't around me.
Right. I mean, it was it was a long time ago. But it's sort of how we met.
How did my letter differ?
I don't know that I'm not remembering you writing to me, but I am remembering
I emailed you
about your band.
I emailed you, yeah.
Oh, okay. You were your band Get Back at that time.
Yeah.
And I can remember taking my son to see you play, I want to say Stratham Park.
Probably one of those Stratham fairs.
Or Alton Bay up in Alton, New Hampshire on Lake Winnipesaukee.
Right. We played a lot of those places.
Yeah. And and we connected there. And, you know, my book at that time was a it was, I wouldn't say it wasn't even a glimmer in my eye, but it wasn't on an active burner at that moment. But I've been reading my journals, like during the pandemic, I reread my journals, and I was talking about my Beatles book in 1997.
Nice.
And it didn't come out till 2014. So, but so we met then, and I guess I don't know. I must have been doing some writing then because, I know what it was. I wrote an article about tribute bands. I bet that's what it was.
Where were you in that? I don't remember that.
It was in it. There was an exhibit. Linda McCartney's photos were exhibited in Manchester. And around the same time, there was a Beatle, maybe it was your band and other tribute bands. And I did an article, it was in the Portsmouth Herald.
Oh, wow.
And they did a tie-in with the Linda McCartney exhibit in Manchester. So it might have been that I wanted to talk to you about tribute bands.
Well, I remember emailing you about that article in 99 because up until that point, I didn't have that many people in my life that were talking about the Beatles. And, they broke up in 1970. I was 10 years old. I did not have the vocabulary to explain the depth of how important they were to me. And there was something about the way you started that article and how we watched A Hard Day's Night and how we all had to tune into that dialect of their accents and all the things that you were saying. You had so many beautiful ways of explaining how they nurtured us, how they enchanted us, how their magic affected us. And I was like, oh my God, this is all the stuff I've always wanted to be able to say and explain because I missed them so much. And I felt like you understood that. And I thought, I've got to talk to this person.
Well, thank you so much because I'm sure I thanked you at the time and since, but like hearing that, like at this moment, like the latest moment of ever right now, right in this now, hearing you say that again is very. I really appreciate that. I think that I was, as I said, I started to write this book. I first thought about writing a book about the Beatles in 97. And, and I thought, well, surely somebody must have. And there was really no books about the fans, and then I just found Mark Catone's book. I don't know if it's called As I Write This Letter was the only fan book that was out there. But because of as I describe it, the intersection of my biography and history and temperament and my parents and the world in Flushing, New York. And like, I felt that I had a real deep understanding of this. Like I saw this thing, wow. What I call my sociological imagination, which is a term from C. Wright Mills, but I had that, at 7. And I just saw this thing and I knew that this was something different. This was extraordinary. And but I was talking about how I came to write. Well, I was surprised that there had been no books about the fans, that. And then when I ended my marriage, I moved, a lot of things are happening in my life, but at every juncture when I would like revisit writing this book, because it never left me, like, it was going to happen. It had to, because again, like I would check no books about the fans, no books about how could this be? And, looking at it again, as a sociologist and as a sort of, you think about like who writes about the Beatles and it sort of made sense sort of that no one had, but like, it was not a good thing that no one had because they were, and also the whole changed everything. This was the other thing, the what I call politics. And I don't mean politics in the sense of like revolution. I'm talking politics in the sense of how they shifted people's perceptions of things and the power structure in some ways, that how they empowered young people and all this. That's political to me. And so that aspect of it and how that, their role as a catalyst and agent of change in the 60s was like nobody was really talking about this. And
it was huge. It was huge because it had never happened before. And because of that, it hasn't changed. the world still thinks it's all about the young. But up until that point, it was all about white guys in crew cuts.
Right. I think we take
for the hit.
Yeah, it was a completely different world. And I felt that, I think that people weren't talking about it because even if you stop and think, like the whole idea of like, for a pop group, changing the course of history, like, well, that's fucking ridiculous. No academic is going to make that claim, right? No serious journalist is going to make that claim.
Not on their own, no.
It's sort of somebody like me. And anyway, so that was my goal, was to really kind of, and the other thing too, like I have a master's degree in child development. So like I have all this that informs how I saw it, when I sat down to write and really look at it. And also I have a PhD in sociology. So I would be reading, my one of the areas that I studied in sociology was, social change, culture change, and like gender, a bunch of things, but also like how things change and historical sociology and all this stuff. And I would read these different theories or articles, and I was like, oh, that kind of explains the Beatles, or that can be applied to Beatlemania. And it's like it was just there, it was just there.
That's so cool.
And so then I moved to, as I said, it never left me. I moved to Massachusetts from New Hampshire in 2006. And, I was doing some other work. I was doing market research work, running focus groups for big pharma. And I feel like I've atoned, so I don't want to even talk about all that. And
talk about your writing. Talk about the actual writing. How often did you sit down when you decided to write the book? Was there any kind of writing schedule?
Pure torture. Torture and procrastination.
But it's one of your favorite subjects. What could be so torturous about writing about the Beatles?
Because why do writers find it torturous? Either perfectionism, procrastination, all the. I was doing interviews, right? So I had to do. I was doing a lot of interviews, which was really fun. I enjoyed those a lot. And some of them were really long. I would. And I would transcribe them. And then I was sort of, some of the paragraphs and chunks in the book actually go back to 1999.
Nice.
Because I had started doing all this writing about, fandom, how fandom is sort of looked down upon. That was the other thing I wanted to address, like this kind of missing of fandom. Like nobody says anything when men travel across the country to a ball game or, to a sporting event, but like for what, and again, this was 99. So the culture, everything around all this has changed so much. But anyway, so I wanted to kind of redeem fandom as a thing, it's a hobby. It's a leisure activity like gardening or whatever. If something brings you joy, like it's like what's acceptable needs to broaden. Like what people do in their lives and what brings them joy needs to, if it doesn't harm anybody else, needs to be broadened. I mean, we're still seeing this now and how difficult that is, right? I'm meandering all over the place. So you asked me about the writing process. When I got into a flow state, when I found the words, it was great. And it just felt so right, and, I integrated the interview material and so when I wanted to find quotes to illustrate the point I was going to make and, found them. And I set up this, using search and Word and made keyword, all this kind of stuff. And, so it was very satisfying.
What helps you get into that flow state?
Well, that's a very good question. I ask myself that every morning. I actually been finding it very difficult to write for like years. Like the paperback of Beatleness came out in 2016, and I had planned to write another book that was looking at some of the sort of growing up with pop culture as a girl, at that time and place, and related issues. And with the election of Trump, like it shifted something for me that was really very extreme and hard to get past. And it's not happened yet. However, I'm dealing with it better. So I said, well, how can I write about this? Like, it didn't seem important anymore. I don't know. And then I did write a few articles. I wrote some Beatles related work, like academic stuff. And I wrote, but I wasn't really writing, and it was torturous. But what changed recently, like this is, like I'll tell the solution to the problem. Yoga. And I am shocked by it because I tried yoga for many, many years. I hated it. It was boring. I just could not get into it. And then in February, just this past February, I don't know what made. There was a course online, and this locally, it's offered locally but done online, and I did it, and I liked it, and I kept doing it, and it's helped me to write. But there's an in-between piece here, which is that the reason I felt suddenly so motivated to write was because all these memories that sometimes come to me for no apparent reason were coming to me during yoga, but they were coming in a different way and inviting me to look at them. Okay.
That makes sense, because they say a lot of memories and feelings.
Absolutely. It's in the body,
Yes, in the
Now,
muscles.
these memories are extra, we can't put labels on people's trauma, but some of them are kind of just sort of benign, like, why am I, like not a big deal. Some of them are quite unpleasant, and some of them are profoundly unpleasant, but none of them are actually new. That's the interesting thing, that there are things that, that cross my mind for one reason or another. Although that said, since this has happened, I feel like my memory is more fluid, that I have access to more things.
That's great. So basically what you were describing was your own alignment. You found a way to get back to yourself. And then as you relaxed, all these things came out, memories, thoughts, feelings about things, ways of putting things into words that you could describe how it fits all the things you're interested in. And you thought, okay, time to start writing again, because this needs to go somewhere.
Well, it was time to really, in a sense, it was like an unblocking. Like, I need to turn, like, a lot of these memories are now like essays. I'm working on.
Nice. Oh, that's great.
Some word essays that kind of deal. I don't know if anybody will ever read them, but I'm getting them out. And in so doing, experiencing those moments of finding that right word, or I don't know, this sentence, every time I read it back, I keep tripping up on it. Why does that happen? And so I go back, and it's like you want to, I think of it like this. Okay, imagine a pine dresser, okay, unfinished pine dresser, and it's a little rough on the top, okay, and you have a piece of silk, okay, and it snags here and there, right?
Oh, yeah.
Snags. So you want to go back and look at that. Is it a piece of dust? Is it whatever it is? It needs to be sanded. It needs to be fixed. It's smooth, like frictionless, I guess, really what I'm saying.
That's a perfect metaphor for it, because lines, whether they're poems or in an article or a book or a lyric, they have to have a flow of their own. They have a music to them and a rhythm. And when you get stuck on something, that's your own frame of reference saying, I can do better than this. There's something else here. So are you a writer that accesses a thesaurus or a rhyming dictionary if you need it?
I'll show you what I use. And this is
it's right here. It's right under my fingertips.
When my mother died and I was cleaning out their apartment, I found this wonderful book, The Synonym Finder. It's fantastic. I love it because it's also text, it's the texture of it. It's big. It's heavy. I just love it.
Oh, yeah.
But I have to say that I am now, if I'm really into it, sometimes I'll just use the thesaurus thing in Word.
Online and stuff too.
Or sometimes I'll go in and want to read a little bit of the etymology. Like it has to be the right word,
Oh, yeah. And you know it when you hear it. I don't know what that is. I know Pat Metheny has said, we write a song and then we end up writing the same song our whole lives with every subsequent song. And it almost seems like we've all been here before, but we forget that we were doing this writing thing. And so then we're listening and waiting for that idea to come. And as soon as you hear it, you go, yeah, that's it. It's like, because you recognize it from your past life and you're just rewriting the same songs in every life or the same articles.
Well, that makes sense because what is it? It's about self-expression, right?
Mm.
The circumstances of your life might have changed, or what Eckhart Tolle would say, your life situation may change, but your expression of yourself, there's a continuity to it. Like there's some piece of you, there's some intelligence of you that's been there all along, right?
Yep.
So that's what you're accessing, I think.
Absolutely. I think it's your spirit and it's infinite intelligence and it's that whole energetic, wonderful thing that makes writing so exciting. Because when you are in that, it's like the best feeling in the world because it is your natural self.
Yeah, it's
really
the energy
great. Of life.
It's it's extremely satisfying to like find that word and save the paragraph. But as I was saying, I was having a really hard time trying to write. And when I was experiencing this, like wanting to write but not being able to, and just like putting myself down for procrastination and blah blah blah. What I was quilting at the time, I was making a quilt.
Nice.
And it was a little story about creativity in that too. But anyway, but I was talking to my therapist. I said, like, I about why I can't write. She says, well, what do you want to do? And says, I just want to quilt. I want to sew all day. She said, well, then sew all day.
Exactly.
Experiment. Don't think about writing for 2 weeks and just sew, And I did that. And then it went quite beyond 2 weeks. But I made this amazing quilt. And I discovered I actually dismantled a quilt I had made 20 years ago that I've been using and rolled it into this new quilt. But it's not like the other one was like a conventional sort of very geometric kind of quilt. I discovered something called improv quilting.
Nice.
And this is it. Like I was doing, like and this gets back to the permission around all of this. Okay.
Yes, that's a big one.
It's like, a quilt, I started, I had dismantled this quilt literally with a seam ripper. Like some of it I tossed, but because I still like the palette and all that. So, and so I'm thinking, well, I started taking out the graph paper. What is the new one? I was like, no, I don't want to do that. I just want to sew. And so, of course, YouTube, where you can learn how to do anything, right?
I love that about YouTube. Yeah.
I discovered there's a thing called improv quilting, and like, yes, that's it, right? So I made this amazing quilt, and then I, building the skill, one thing leads to another, and so it's then I started to learn about free motion quilting, which is really hard to do. But one of the introductory things that you do when you want to learn that is called the meander. Okay, it's called the meander pattern.
Perfect.
Okay. So here I am, improv quilting, free motion quilting, meander. What is the theme here? And it's like exploration, exploring patterns, exploring movement, and not being confined by the rules of this thing.
Love it. That's perfect.
Right. So I started this quilt. But what I realized in this is that it's not about writing versus quilting or gardening, which I also consider to be an extremely creative thing. It's about how, if you have a creative impulse, like it's going to come out one way or another. Right?
Oh, yeah.
Well, let's put it this way. It should, in a healthy situation, it should. Like, again, it gets to permission. Like, for most of my life, these types of activities that were, I wasn't encouraged to be a creative person in that way. And, but it's even with, I realized with the quilting, it was like writing improv quilting is like, I made the quilt I made is based on 6-inch squares, but when you look at it, you don't really see the squares,
Oh, cool. So, do you have it there? You want to show it to us?
I could get a picture of it up in a moment.
Okay.
What was I going to say?
The 6-inch squares.
No, it's like, I realized it was like writing in that.
Absolutely.
Like I would walk around and in the periods where I was really struggling with writing, I would come up with all these great lines of start pieces. I might even dictate it into my phone, whatever, but I would never do it. I kept this like, I just have to know what I'm going to say, but I don't have to know what I'm going to say. And exactly. and doing the quilting freed me to remember that I don't have to sit down and know what I'm going to say. Now, this sounds really like dumb and basic, but I don't know. It's like when there's a palette. Okay, so there's a defined color palette. So it's not like but I don't know what that square is going to look like when it's done.
Exactly.
It doesn't matter, right?
Exactly.
It's going to look like it's supposed to look, I guess.
Absolutely. And that's the whole idea is as artists, we need that sort of, what is the form going to be? So then I can fill it. And we're not sure what it is yet. So exploration was exactly the perfect word, because you have to give yourself permission to dig around and look for the nuggets and save all those wonderful things. Like James Taylor has little ideas all over the place and then eventually starts putting them in one notebook per song. And he makes little recordings, and he would pull out his little tape recorder and play us these different little moments of songs that weren't used yet. And then even though he's creatively coming up with all these bits, there is a day where he just sits down and goes, well, I don't feel any new things coming, but do any of these things fit together? And he starts making a quilt of all these song ideas, So,
and that's because you created it. I mean, obviously, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to find a way to connect them, but they're both products of you, right?
I think the intention is good. I mean, as long as you say, I will finish this someday, or I'm looking forward to finishing this, your brain will find a way, whether it's tomorrow or 17 years from now. It doesn't matter. Yeah. It's the decision and the intent and the self-respect. Like, I think that's one of the reasons I'm so crazy about Paul McCartney, is that he gives himself so much permission, and people admire him for that, and they want to take him down for that. But it's exactly what an artist needs, is this complete freedom to do whatever, whenever, and turn it into something if you desire, but not to stop. The whole idea is to keep going, because that is life.
Yeah, I'm sure you've probably read or are familiar with Rick Rubin's book.
Yes, I loved that book. It was quite good.
I loved it too. I bought it for my grandson. I thought I had the same response to that book as I had to, like, when I read The Power of Now, which is like, okay, this all makes sense to me, but like, I was never really allowed to talk about this, Right.
And who are you going to talk about it with? That's why I want these conversations.
But I think what's great about his book is that it's how he puts it in the context of life, of just being creative, and not only in like making art, but also just as a way of cultivating your humanity and your growth as a person.
Love it. Yeah.
Really important.
Did you read Writing Down the Bones by Natalie Goldberg?
I did twice.
Oh, yeah. 2-3 times.
Twice in the past year and a half.
Another year and a half. Oh, that's great. Because that's the whole idea, is give yourself permission to write the worst junk in America and just let your pen keep moving. So what kind of things do you do? Do you ever do any free association or object writing to just get the pumped up and have something accidentally pop out that you could use?
I actually don't. And I should, people talk, the daily practice.
Well, it's like saying you should be weeding or you should be quilting. It's like you do what you feel like doing when you feel like doing it. That's the magic too. Follow the energy.
But I do, I can talk myself into justifying anything.
So can anybody, pretty much.
Right, but I have to watch it because okay, how will I feel at the end of the day? Will I have what will make me feel better? Because
that's the question to ask in the moment of what will make me feel the best right now.
Right. And
that's like Abraham Hicks thinking.
Right, because that's going to allow me to move forward.
Exactly. And it's also going to help your alignment, and it's going to help you move up the emotional scale so that if there is something bothering you, you can stop focusing on it and making it bigger and start to focus on something that matters in the moment that's giving you pleasure. And you can actually make that maybe even into a finished article or a new blog post or a new song or whatever it is you're creating, And that is the thrill then, is that discovery and making something out of nothing and then realizing I'm not such a schmuck after all. Hey.
Right. Yeah, that I'm not such a schmuck after all moment is really great. Like the other day,
that's your true self. That's that uninhibited, complete spirit, whole self. When you feel your best is when you're doing your best human thing. And everything else is diminishing from that. So the whole thing is to work towards staying there. And nobody can stay there. It's just variety of energies throughout the day. But the whole point is be your best self, right? So that's why it makes sense with what Rick Rubin was saying, as well as what an artist needs.
Right. But thinking about this, I mean, then there's the issue of, you get that wonderful feeling. But if, then there's a question of, well, do I want to share this? And then, so, which brings it, to a whole other level. But I think by the time, I don't know, it seems to me by the time you're willing to do that, I mean, it feels a little risky, whatever. But I think by the time you're willing to do that, you kind of know in your gut that it's like ready for a trusted insider to have a look or a read,
Sure. And,
how do you know when that, I think, how do you know, though, if it's the right person and when that time comes, though? That's right.
Well, it's like find what you love and share it, or how Arnold Schwarzenegger will say, be great at something and tell people about it. It's like, really, I don't care what anybody thinks about my music and my songs. I really don't. It feels fantastic when someone likes something or they say it lands with them. I would definitely be like James Taylor, who says it still matters to him very much that people really love his music. But I haven't had that situation where masses of people have been exposed to my music. And I have struggled with that for so many decades, and how different things like that can hurt, because you think, but I like what I'm doing and I feel like it's good and people could or should be listening to this. They're not going to listen to anything they don't know is there. It has to be advertised. And I don't particularly like advertising that much. It's like if I could just be on every big TV show, everybody would hear about me. But I have to do all the work too. So I'd rather do the creative stuff. And for me, I'm putting all my favorite sounds, all my favorite words, all my favorite vocals or background percussion or whatever it is. It's like I'm just putting all my favorite stuff into a song and watching it bounce off into the world and have some fun. And, it's not about people liking it for me. It's about making more, because I enjoy making it.
Right. Yeah, yes. I mean,
so then how did you ever get published? How did you know, okay, I'm going to take this first piece of writing and I'm going to approach a newspaper or
you're talking about you're talking about
when you first started professionally writing. I mean, you got articles published first before you started writing books, no?
Yeah, you just send stuff out. And sometimes, like the Globe, I had no, actually, I take that back. I did have in New Hampshire, I did have some clips. I had a column in a local paper. I was writing a bunch of stuff, which I had completely forgotten about till just now. Used to write about things, different things. If you can get enough clips, certainly a publisher wants to see, what else you've written. But I didn't really have a whole lot. I had maybe a handful of publications before my book. Even like going back to I had something in a sociology journal in the 80s, but but I didn't, I had done different kinds of writing. Like I was working for a child abuse prevention organization in New Hampshire. So I produced a big report. I did doing all kinds of, but when it was time to write the book, which I knew was, it had to be in the world by 2014, because after all these years, I want to be part of that 50th anniversary conversation. And if I'm not,
cool.
I will regret it for the rest of my life. I mean, the fact
that ahead to that,
it was like imagining that regret was really a huge motivator. Seriously. It was like to preempt that regret, which is not
but
bad.
It's also, it's a fine tuning of what you actually want. You could look at it as a negative, like, well, that really pushed me to get it done. But the whole point was you focused on what would be the benefit of this. It would be a big benefit and I would be disappointed without it. So that was more of the pain body there. You decided to do.
Exactly. I had to do it also because there was still no book there was still no book that did what I did. Okay. And I conclude it's because it was for me to write. Nobody else could have done that.
That's true. That's why it's so important for every person on the planet to use their creative abilities. And we all do. We don't necessarily make art or paintings or music or write books, but we all have this creative thing. And you're using it all the time. So the more aware of it you can become, the more pleasure you can have in your time on Earth, and the more you have to share. Share your best stuff, share your best energy.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know what was going to happen when the book came out. I didn't know how it would be received, and I still, frankly, feel it has not gotten the attention it deserves. But I mean, what author doesn't feel that way? So. And my publisher has not been as supportive as ideally they would have been. But hey, they published it, and it's out in the world, and I'm very proud of it. And I would like to write another book. Now that I don't want to say found my voice, because I think it wasn't that I lost my voice. I just feel like, I just did not feel like I wanted to write. I don't know. I don't know what it is, but yoga and transformational.
Quilting and gardening are equal. Cooking, anything.
Yes. Yeah.
And don't you remember in Natalie's book where she was talking about having all this stress about trying to meditate properly, and her teacher was saying, just do walking meditation, just do writing meditation, like do your thing. It becomes a meditation because it aligns you. It gets you back in touch with your true self, which is your spirit, which is unhindered.
Right. And is not concerned with judgment
and doesn't judge you. Like if you're hearing voices, because we all have airwaves picking up, we're all antenna, and we pick up on energy and we pick up on thoughts. And sometimes a thought comes by that's not very conducive to a healthy life or to making you feel good, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's coming from your brain. And it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a message from on high where you should be paying attention to it. If anything is coming from on high, whatever you want to describe that as, it's always uplifting and always loving and always putting you in the best possible light.
Right. Right.
And if it's negative, it's an old memory or part of the trauma or a pain in a muscle that reminds you of something. Like just recently, in one of the winter coats I was in over a cold day in the supermarket, I realized I had tied my wrist closings on my winter coat too tight. And instantly in the checkout line, I freaked and almost broke out in a sweat because I can remember being grabbed by the wrist and yanked around as a child. And like, you're following us or you're coming now and you're going, like there was no choice. And I just thought, oh my God, like you said, it remains in your body, And so it's so important to be gentle with yourself, especially as an artist. We have been beaten up as human beings enough. Yeah. Do not beat yourself up. Do not keep the entertainment of self-bashing because it just makes you feel worse and nothing good comes of it,
Yeah, the negative self. I mean, I've gotten better with that, but it has kept me back. It still does at times, and it keeps.
That's a thought. That's a thought. So if you start listening to Brooke Castillo or Dana Wilde or any of those folks, everything is brain training. Or even Jerry Seinfeld, right? He talks about the horse being like a wild stallion, and you have to contain it. You have to train it, and. Brooke Castillo says the brain is like a 3-year-old running around with scissors, So when you have a thought like that, how can you turn it around? You're a writer. You could just change it.
Right. It's
practice.
It's practice, and it's
exhausting. And it's like Jim Carrey says, you got to tune yourself like a guitar. You got to tune yourself thousands and thousands of times a day because
it's exhausting. But
it is. But
once you start
it's necessary.
It does get easier, and this sort of related to that is stressful circumstances become opportunities to do it differently and see it differently, and
make something better, make it your own way.
But I think a lot of people, a lot of adults especially, are it's like, you're not an artist, you're not creative. In other words, people, this idea of like, well, some people are creative and some people aren't. I don't know about that. No. I think that that's kind of unfair. And I think it says more about our culture than it does about anybody's particular talent or temperament,
Absolutely. Yeah, I think everybody is. And if they could see themselves that way and allow themselves to explore and find the things that make them the happiest, they will find that they're living in that more often than in the chaos of their own mind.
But people don't, again, it gets back to this permission thing. It's like, people feel they don't have permission, either because they have demands of people that are dependent on them, or because they have to earn money, or because for whatever reason. And it's not good, I mean, it's like, it's a kind of, it's something you do for yourself, to allow yourself to, to commit to doing the thing, like when I did I'm not going to write for 2 weeks, I'm just going to focus on quilting. One of the things that was interesting is like all the little, it's like I found myself buying that tool that, well, maybe I don't, I talked myself out of, I don't really need that. Well, it did make it more pleasant,
Sure. The right tool for the job, as my dad would say.
Right. Or this is when I used to wallpaper, like I used to hate stopping to change the blade, but you have to, or else it's going to look like shit, right? It's like with the quilting, it's like, in other words, I respected the time and energy and focus I was putting in. I was respecting it more and allowing it to have the tools that it needed, like.
I love to hear you say that. That's great.
Like change the blade, like, you need more, order more, it's like.
Yes, use it up. It's for now. As my friend Kate Chadbourne always says, everything is for now. And people will say, well, you need this. You don't really need that. Or why don't you get rid of that? You haven't opened that box in 20 years. Like this puzzle. I started this puzzle at the beginning of the pandemic. And I just worked on it here and there because I was so excited to be teaching from home that I was just hanging out in my studio here, writing songs and recording as many things as I could, because it was like, woohoo, I'm home. This is lovely. And I had that puzzle from a Beatlefest catalog, at least 25 years, in an unopened, sealed box in a closet. And somebody would have easily said, oh my God, you're never going to put that puzzle together, And yet, the time came and I thought, it's time. And now it's so exciting because it's framed and it's beautiful. And it was hard to do because it only looks good far away. Close up, it's all very blurry. And they took a beautiful color photograph and made it black and white. This is the photograph of the inside of Magical Mystery Tour booklet. And they're all wearing their colorful clothes. And it was fun to do. But for the longest time, I had so many parts happening and no features, no facial features. And I thought, how could I have so many pieces together and yet I don't see anybody's face? I know the 4 of them are standing here, So it's all that patience and the whole thing about life and all the creating that we're all doing. It's all a puzzle. Yeah. If I had never seen the box top, I wouldn't know what I was going after. And for all the songs I write or the articles that you start, or when you say you just start with a little idea, there's no box top to say what you're even creating. You're letting it and you're giving yourself permission and following the interest and the curiosity to turn it into something. What could this be? Yeah. And, a couple of years ago, I was trying to develop various courses to teach.
Mhm.
And I was like, well, I'll buy the camera equipment and the lights and whatever I need. Let's see if that's, something, because I was asked to do these things and it kept getting put off, put off, put off. And I thought, well, I like talking. I'm going to talk to some creative people, and then all of a sudden, like you said, this thing just took off. I don't even know how. For the longest time, I didn't even expect it to be this. I had no desire to say, I'm going to start a podcast. It didn't even occur to me.
It happened. It unfolded. It's like there was no struggle or work around it, right?
Somebody told me. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, no, that's wonderful when that happens, because that it's supposed to be there, right? It's supposed to be.
Well, for now, it's pretty good. I'm not going to argue, but it's fun. So, what about like a writing nook or a favorite pen, or do you write on a laptop?
I do write on a laptop.
Really? Not a fountain pen and paper?
No, I do have
typewriter and
my pen. I use a Pilot Gel .38, which is a super fine point. Wow. I write in my journal with, like, when I write on, like, I have legal pads all over the house.
Yes.
You want my technique? I'll tell you. It's like legal pads all over the house, Post-it notes. And nice. Every once in a while, it gets a little I feel like it's getting away from me. So I put them all together, keep or talk. It's a keep. I sometimes create a file or add it to an existing file that's thematically consistent. So I put all that stuff together. But if I'm really writing, I do tend to, at this point, I'm writing on the computer in Word. But
you Scrivener?
I haven't. People have recommended it.
Yeah, I like it.
I also want to not add any tech to my life that is truly not wonderful, because there's too much tech in my life, and I believe there's too much tech in everybody's life. Another thing you're not allowed to say.
Well, yeah, I can remember my mom said, I don't want a microwave. I am against it. I do not want a microwave. And I don't need a dishwasher, and I don't need a da-da-da-da. And, we'd all still be in the horse and buggy probably without it.
Everybody draws the line where they draw the line. But a number of people have recommended that program to me. So,
but you don't have to compile your own books, I guess. You've got a publisher. They're doing all that for you.
Well, what I'm talking about now is writing sort of essays and this stuff I've been working on lately, which I'm not sure what it's going to be. But as far as another book, you have to, if I'm going to go with a publisher, then I would have to submit it to them in Word docs, which is, sort of the standard. But I do, if I'm sketching out a night, in fact, even for this, okay, the brief correspondence we had setting this up, right? I'm thinking, okay, I sort of had a vague sense of what you were doing. And then I actually went and did a little research, and I listened to bits of the other ones you did. Truth here. And so when I was making notes about what I might want to talk about or what would come up, I did it with my .38 on a legal pad, because it's that kind of stuff. Okay.
Yes.
Now, if there's enough here, which there actually kind of is, perhaps, for a piece about creativity, then I would take this to the computer and,
yes.
save it in a file.
Yes. I have a big notebook, and I just do all kinds of free association in it, and playing with words or sentences or bad rhyme after sentence after crazy sentence with bad rhymes, and just let myself go with all kinds of things. Yeah. And then on the other side, like all on the right side pages, fill the whole book if you want to keep going. But then every once in a while on the left side, I'll pick up my guitar if I have an idea already, and I'll flip through the book and look for anything interesting and start writing a lyric on that side. And it gets as messy and as thought all over the place as you just showed on your legal pad. And then at some point when there's a couple of verses and maybe a chorus, I go to the laptop and then start writing the actual lyric.
Messy to handle anymore. Like, this is
yes.
why the point.
Yes, you can't make sense out of it.
You can get really tiny, but yeah, after a while, okay, things here that need to, be salvaged. Yeah, it's a gathering It's like a
yes. And what's here, and what have I said so far, and what do I need to say to continue this thought? And okay, I have two verses. Oh, maybe one more verse and a bridge. Okay, let me write another section of chords for the chorus, and I'll just write a bridge. Oh, look at this, we're done. Oh no, it needs a title. Wait, and I'll flip through the book and find something interesting and find a title. And sometimes they just come to you. A whole idea for a song or a whole.
Do you get lyrics first or music first?
For the longest time, because I was always playing guitar, I got guitar chords and stuff first, or a riff. But recently I was listening to some Sheryl Crow, and she had a really cool tempo. I think it was about 110 beats per minute. And I just loved the groove. And I thought, let me set that on my metronome. And I was writing some words, and I just said, let's face it, very little makes sense. It's all a game. It's all made up. It's all this, it's all that. And I did a whole giant rant kind of life and how strange it is and how weird we are and all that kind of stuff. And I think it was eventually called Make Something Better, but it instead of just finding chords and grabbing the guitar right away, I just kept the metronome on, opened up a little version of, the DAW that you can record into called Logic. And I just started a cappella singing to a click because I wanted that tempo. And I wrote a melody without any music around it. Wow. And sang the whole thing once I realized this is the order of this rant that I want to put it in. And then I wrote the music afterwards. And I've never written a song that way, but I think this creative process is so interesting. I'm always trying to get into it from another way. Because the first time it happened, I was 10 years old, and I just thought, what was that? That was the coolest thing ever. Will it ever happen again? And I'm always trying to find ways to make it happen more. And when I hear of Peter Gabriel writes this way, or Carly Simon did it like that, or Pat Metheny tried this, and Paul Simon was doing this, and George Harrison did that. And like the whole trick with George Harrison, open up a book, and the first two words you see, write a song, and he sees the words gently weeps. It's like these little things make it playful, and they help you just get away from yourself, which is filled with all these have-tos and shoulds. And this is a problem. And my teacher said this, and my mother said that. And it's got nothing to do with any of that. It's just go have fun and play with words, play with chords, play with articles, play with words, play with your garden, play with your quilt. Just be free and freaking make yourself happy and go do your thing.
Why? But here's the thing. Yes, I agree. But why is it so hard?
Because we keep saying it's so hard. If we started to say, you know what? I'm going to find my way out of this hole. Half of it is your brain saying, see, there's this thing called the RAS, the reticular activating system that brain trainers will tell you about. And your brain is always filtering out all this crud and giving you just the things you need in this moment. So I don't know my heart rate. I don't know how hot I feel, what the temperature actually is. I don't know my circulatory system or what's happening on CNN right now. I don't have to know all the things that are happening because there's too much. Your brain knows that, so it filters it out. But as soon as you say, I want to find the right quilting needle, or I got to find a pattern that'll help me mesh this new thing over on this side of the quilt, your brain says, okay, fine. And it goes and looks for it. And that's why you get the aha moment somewhere where you're walking down the street and you see this piece of material in the window and you go, I got to get into that shop and buy that. Here's the thing I was looking for. Because your brain is still helping you find it. You got to set yourself a task. You got to let your brain go after what you want rather than you feel crappy. You definitely feel crappy. You're going to stay feeling crappy.
Off the default. You just like don't listen to it or get out of it.
Well, how about that movie, What the Bleep Do We Know? Where they say we all fall into a hole. We have like grooves in our brain and they're very comfortable. That's how I am. This is where
Well, that's how you die.
How my mother made me.
You can't live that way because you stop growing. I mean, that's the other thing. You have to, even within a creative practice of some kind, you have to change it up sometime because otherwise it gets stale. And like I'm left-handed, and sometimes like I'm a big doodler too. Like if I'm listening to podcasts and some of them are actually quite nice, and they're cool on my refrigerator, but maybe someday I'll do something with them. But anyway, so sometimes I doodle with my right hand, and it's completely different,
That's fun.
But, that's kind of an extreme example. But like you were saying before about like, the music come first or words come first, or where do you, in other words, if you try different ways of doing something, never know how.
Because if I pick up an acoustic guitar, very often it's going to come out sounding like a James Taylor kind of thing. It's going to be nice and easy and mellow. And I came up with a little riff one day and I went, this is cool, but what can I do with it? And I thought, let me cue up a little groove somewhere, and brought up the rhythm program on the computer and just quickly made a groove. And I purposefully played the riff so that the fill wasn't where you expected the drum fill. And that turned out to be the song I use for the podcast now. This is a song of mine called Night Vision. Oh. And it was just a tiny little thing that sounded like a James Taylor tune that I thought I could write words and make a nice little song out of this. But I thought, why don't I make it an instrumental and make it a little bit more driving? How can I get it more driving? It's like, well, up the tempo a little bit. Again, trying to do something different to break out of my own habits, because from writing from 10 years old on, I'm used to sitting on the floor with an acoustic guitar, having it bounce off the wall and be singing nice and quietly and soothing myself and coming up with ideas. And it's like, but now it's too low to sing. I can't sing this over a band. I have to put it up in a higher register so that I can sing it out over a band. And I have to write something that's more interesting to play drums to, because I love playing drums. And, it's this, all these different ideas that occur to me out of necessity. Like, this isn't thrilling me anymore. What is? Oh, this color is. Let me use this.
Do you ever feel overwhelmed with all of this? Do you ever feel like...
Oh, absolutely.
Sometimes it's just like too much?
Yeah, I get tired of hearing myself talk and think and teach, and everything I've ever written, I go, and I could still do better, and I want to make better recordings, and why don't my productions sound like Elliot Shiner, and why won't Dave O'Donnell teach me some of his tricks? And there's still so many things calling me that I want to get better at and do. But I also realize that it's not necessarily desire, it's angst, and I don't want to give too much to the angst. And don't get me wrong, there are days where I'm in the hole and I'm crying and worried about all the same stuff that probably any human is. But
back up a second about desire and angst.
Okay. Because you can desire something, but if you're longing for it, you've already decided you can't have it, and it gets back to permission. And that's a really sad thing. Right. So when you're crying your eyes out thinking, I want this and I'll never have it, because you think you won't ever give it to yourself. It's like, no, give it to yourself, because as far as we know, there is this one life. And what are you waiting for?
All right.
So good to see you.
Yeah, same here. And keep in touch. And thank you again for this opportunity. In talking about these issues is helped me to clarify some of my thinking about this too. So I appreciate that.
Well, that's great. Well, I'm going to go read some more posts of yours and get re-inspired myself.
All right, take care.
Thanks, Beatle Candy. It's been fun.
Yes.
Enjoy the book Beatleness by Candy Leonard, and visit her website, candyleonard.com, for more articles and essays about all kinds of things. For more of this conversation with Candy, visit my YouTube channel. Thanks for listening.
Give my attention or look away. Make something better, make it my own way. 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 You gotta shape it, tune it, fix it, choose it. Gotta love it, own it, leave it or move it. If you can't drive it, steer it, bless it and relate it, rest it, abate it, change it, renew it.